Tears of the Kingdom is the Frasier of video games, in the sense that it's a direct sequel to a beloved classic that's better than the original in almost every way, except for the opening, which was immeasurably better in the original. Tears of the Kingdom is one of the best games ever made. At least that's what I thought during my first 80 hours or so. Now over 100 hours into the game, I'm honestly not so sure anymore. I kept going back and forth on whether I wanted to make a full video on Tears of the Kingdom. There have just been so many people that have already talked about it ridiculously in depth since it came out last year. Can I really add anything to the discussion? I don't know, but what I do know is there aren't many games that I've put this many hours into. Especially as an adult, the only other games I think I've put anywhere near this amount of time into are Pokemon and Animal Crossing. So obviously there's something there, and if I don't talk about it now, immediately following my first playthrough of the game, I don't think I'll ever have a better chance to talk about it, and who knows how many games I'll rack this many hours up in the future. So here's my review of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I wasn't particularly impressed by the start of the game, just like how you probably weren't particularly impressed by the start of this review. They start the game off taking you through this generic ghost train ride, where you're stuck walking down this linear path with pre-programmed set pieces and events. But luckily that part's nice and short. It's basically what and I think a lot of other people expected from the beginning of the game looking at the trailers. What happens after that is pretty similar to what I was expecting too. I figured we were going to get another great plateau of sorts. After all, you need a tutorial area for a game like this, even if it is a sequel, just to get new players accustomed to the game. I just wasn't sure exactly how it would play out. Turns out it plays out pretty darn similar to the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild, just in the sky. On the Great Sky Islands, the game's tutorial area, you get your different abilities, which at first glance don't seem all that much better or different from the ones in Breath of the Wild, but it turns out they kind of are. As most of you watching this probably already know, the 4 abilities this time around are Ultra Hand, which allows you to move stuff around and attach stuff together, Fuse, which allows you to specifically attach things to your weapons and shields, Recall, which allows you to rewind time on certain objects, and Ascend, which allows you to ascend through specific surfaces. I was kind of annoyed while playing that you could only ascend through certain types of terrain, but I guess it makes sense. It's already sort of easy to break the game with the abilities they give you, and I imagine letting you phase through literally every vertical surface would break it even more. On the Great Sky Islands, it felt like there wasn't a whole lot to do with the abilities. Ultra Hand seemed by far the most useful, as it allowed me to stick a bunch of trees together and make bridges and poles to climb. Fuse felt kind of useless because I could only fuse weak weapons or shields to other weak objects, making a slightly better weak weapon or shield. Recall felt kind of useless since I couldn't find any reason to ever want to rewind anything. And Ascend was kind of useful, but only in a few specific areas. When you get down to the surface, all of that quickly changes. Ultra Hand is still pretty useful, but suddenly all of the other powers have just as much utility as it has. You start finding all these new items that you can fuse to your weapons and shields. You start seeing these giant boulders falling from the sky that you can use Recall on to gain some massive height. And you start finding surfaces to ascend through all over the dang place. I feel like a big dummy about the fuse ability. Since you can fuse weapons to other weapons, I figured I'm just gonna fuse the best weapons to the other best weapons and make even better weapons. But it turns out you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to fuse weapons to weapons or shields to other shields. It took me like 5 in-game hours to figure out that what you're actually supposed to do is fuse monster parts to your weapons and shields to make them stronger. Which sort of begs the question to me as to why the monsters themselves don't just drop the weapons. It seems sort of like an extra unnecessary step, but I don't know. Nintendo spent a lot more time planning this game than I've spent analyzing it, so I'm sure they have some method to their madness. I wish you could fuse more things to your shields and have it be useful. It's cool that you can fuse rockets and carts and fans and mirrors to your shields and get a boost or a skateboard or a mirror shield, but if you fuse a glider to your shield, it should let you glide in the air for a little bit or something when you shield surf. If you fuse a wheel to your shield, it should let you use your shield as a unicycle or something. Just a few more creative options like that would have been a lot of fun. One thing I neglected to mention earlier about the Great Sky Island is that you also learn about the Zonai while you're up there. It turns out the Zonai, this ancient but technologically advanced race that made makeshift cars and planes and stuff, left their stuff just all over the place on the Sky Islands, and in these gacha machines. And if you find these Zonai charges, you can stick them in the gacha machines and get a whole bunch of Zonai device capsules in return. So where do you get Zonai charges? Well, you can get some of them from these robots in the Sky Islands, and inside of shrines. Yep, the shrines are back. This time there are 150 of them compared to the 120 in Breath of the Wild. But the main place you get Zonai charges is, and this is getting into spoilers by the way, the main place you get Zonai charges is in the depths. The big secret that I can't believe Nintendo managed to keep a secret as long as they did. I was already excited at the prospect of the new caves that were going to be dispersed all over the map in Tears of the Kingdom. And you find out about the depths pretty early in the game, but I figured it was just another name for the new caves. But no, it's like a completely different thing. There are like 4 whole layers of the map in this game. You got the Sky Islands, you've got the surface, you've got caves, and then you've got the depths. Granted, the Sky Islands and caves are kind of small and dispersed. Compared to the surface, the Sky Islands and the regular caves only cover maybe like a fifth of the map, if that. But the depths are literally as big as the entire surface map. 100% of it. That's so insane. It's like they took the Dark World concept from A Link to the Past and ran with it. There's just so much. And it was really bold of them not to include this in the marketing, because in my opinion, this is easily the biggest and best selling point of the game. The weapon fusion is sort of interesting, but it just sort of feels like it adds extra steps to the game. The Zonai devices are kind of cool, but there's not much of a reason to use them at the start of the game because they have so little battery they just disappear after a few seconds. You're way better off using a horse in the early game. And a lot of people thought the Zonai devices were just sort of a rehash of Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. But the Depths fixes all of this. The Depths is where you find all the best fusion materials, it's where you find a reason to use the Zonai devices because the skeleton horses down there are super limited. It's where you mine materials for more batteries to charge the Zonai devices, eventually allowing you to fly basically anywhere on a hover bike or a hot air balloon or whatever. It's a great gameplay loop. If there's any downgrade from Breath of the Wild, it's the champion powers, which are now called Sage Summons. You still get a wind power, a lightning power, a fire power, and a water power, but they mostly feel like downgrades of the previous powers. Toland's power allows you to fly forward now instead of up, but being able to fly up on a whim with Rivali's Gale was way more versatile. Riju allows you to shoot a bolt of lightning, which is cool, but with all these you have to run up to the character, prepare their power, and then activate it separately. It's nowhere near as convenient or as intuitive as it was in Breath of the Wild. Lackey's power is useful for mining, but again, I would have preferred the Super Shield from Breath of the Wild. And Sidon's power is by far the biggest downgrade. It does give you a shield, which is useful for about a second, and then you get a water slash, which I've found virtually no practical use for outside of one boss fight. I would much rather have had the free revival every so often from Mipha's Grace. Now when I need a fairy, I have to teleport to one of the Sky Islands where they spawn, slowly crawl around attempting to catch one, and then make sure I'm always stocked up before getting into a dangerous fight, rather than just waiting for Mipha's Grace to recharge. Much like the fusion technique, it's just extra steps for something that used to be so easy. Also, Tears of the Kingdom would be much better without loading screens. I mean, yeah, that's a given. Basically every game would be better without loading screens. But in the year 2023, why do we still have loading screens? Solid state drives are so cheap now, even compared to how much they cost just 5 or 10 years ago. I guess you do need to disincentivize fast traveling everywhere, whenever you want, or to discourage deaths, but loading screens shouldn't be the way to do it. They're not that bad in Tears of the Kingdom. All things considered, they're pretty quick, but they still get annoying the more you play. Hashtag no more loading screens. But those are basically my only complaints, the fusion ability, the champion powers, and the loading screens. Everything else about the game is so good. I feel like the light routes and the depths are the perfect distance apart from each other. Any closer together and it would have been too easy, and any further apart and it would have been too frustrating and dark. Some of the quests on the surface are fun, while others aren't. But again, they're all optional, so if you're not having fun, just stop doing the quest and move on to another one. The world is still completely packed with different quests and all sorts of people and places to see and interact with. On a technical level, the graphics are still about as good as the Switch can do. It's insanely impressive what they were able to pull off with the hardware, and it totally puts most other AAA developers to shame. Like, yeah, there are definitely some other games that look way nicer, but what's the point of graphics if you're not having fun?
If it's not fun, why bother?
The music, it's about the same as Breath of the Wild. Nothing too spectacular that really stands out, except for the music that plays when you're fighting Colgera. This was probably the highest point of the game for me personally, and I've heard this from a few other people too. This boss fight is so good. The way that it plays with the new verticality options of Tears of the Kingdom, all of the bosses are a massive improvement over the bosses from Breath of the Wild. Same for the dungeons, at least the 4 main dungeons. They're way more interesting mechanically and aesthetically. A lot of people liked the way you had to maneuver the different pieces of the Divine Beasts, but that sort of micromanagement in dungeons is never something that I look forward to. I'd much rather have the more open-ended level design from this game. There's nothing inherently wrong with either type of design. This one just jives more with how I like to play video games. The shrines were about the same in this game as they were in Breath of the Wild. They all felt very samey after a while. especially the ones where the whole puzzle was finding the entrance to the shrine inside of a cave, or bringing a glowing rock from one place to another. Those were this game's equivalent to the tests of strength or the gyro-controlled shrines from Breath of the Wild. Just another something to check off the list. Not a ton of fun compared to everything else in the game. The Koroks, same thing. Lift up a rock, put it somewhere else, shoot an arrow at a balloon, step on a flower a few times. Fun little distractions, and I love that they're there since it means that there's always something to do no matter where you go, but just not a lot to talk about there. I said this about Breath of the Wild, and I'm gonna say it again about Tears of the Kingdom. I really wish the game had full voice acting. We're getting to the point where cinematically these games feel super impressive and deep and emotional, except when they stop talking. You can tell a really heartfelt and emotional story without voice acting, but if a significant chunk of your game is going to have voice acting anyway, I feel like you may as well go all the way with it. It really helps the world feel alive and lived in a game like, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Instead, we just get... Then again, the random grunts and moans everyone does can be kind of funny, I guess. I especially like Hestu and Pen. Though I'm sorry to say Pen is a significant downgrade from Cass. Still not sure why they didn't bring him back. I thought for sure we'd get a DLC pack about him or something. And I guess that's it. You'd think a game I'd spent over 100 hours playing would have more to talk about, but so much of that playtime was just wandering around exploring, mapping out the entirety of the depths and completing shrines until I got bored. If you like exploring and mapping out new areas while solving puzzles, then this is a no-brainer. If you prefer tightly crafted, more linear action-based challenges or a more complicated puzzle, then the game might not be for you. It is, for better or for worse, Breath of the Wild, but more of everything. Most of the game is improved upon, but there are just a couple things Breath of the Wild did better that I'd say make it still worth going back to. So where do we go from here? Check out this video I made a few years ago on the future of the Zelda series that talks about some potential things they could do with the series going forward. Or if you want to listen to me talk about Zelda for a half hour, watch my Zelda Mega video where I talk about my experiences with the series as a whole. Also, let me know what you thought of Tears of the Kingdom, or what you'd like to see in the next Zelda game in the comments. Thanks for watching.
Giant enemy crab.